Emma Clark heard a soft, hesitant knock on her front door, the kind that instantly told her something was wrong, and when she opened it, she found her 22-year-old nephew Liam standing there, shoulders tense, eyes lowered, looking nothing like the bright, joking young man she was used to seeing, so she stepped aside without a word and let him in, feeling the air shift with quiet worry. As he walked past her, she noticed the way his hand shook slightly, as if he was carrying something heavy inside him, and she gently asked what had brought him over so unexpectedly, but he only gave a small nod and said he needed to talk, his voice thin and unsure, making her heart tighten because she knew he only came to her when he felt completely overwhelmed. He sat on the edge of the couch like someone afraid to fall apart, staring at his shoes, and she could tell he wasn't just sad, he was scared, and that fear wrapped around the room like a quiet storm. Emma sat down beside him, leaning forward, waiting patiently, wanting to give him space to breathe, because she had watched him grow up and knew he often hid his feelings until they became too much to carry alone. The living room felt unusually still, as if the silence itself was waiting for him to speak, and she sensed this wasn't a small problem or a passing worry but something that had been building inside him for days, maybe months. She asked again, gently, what was going on, but he only swallowed hard and whispered that he didn't know how to start, and she told him he could say anything, that her home was always a safe place. Those words seemed to shake something loose in him because he finally lifted his face, and the look in his eyes made her inhale sharply. There was fear there, yes, but also deep confusion and vulnerability, the kind people try to hide because they don't want to be judged. He seemed younger in that moment, like the quiet child she used to comfort after hard days, and she could see he was fighting an inner battle between staying silent and finally telling someone what hurt. The weight in his expression made her straighten, preparing herself for whatever he needed to say, and he took a long breath, the kind that fills the room with tension, and said he had come to tell her the truth about something he had been holding inside too long. Emma's chest warmed with concern because she could tell this wasn't about work, school, or something simple. This was emotional, personal, something he couldn't share with anyone else, and she felt protective in a way only family could. He looked away again as if searching for courage, rubbing his palms against his jeans, and the small, shaky movement made it clear he was terrified of how she might react. She leaned a little closer, keeping her voice soft, reminding him he didn't have to be afraid with her, and after a long moment he nodded slightly, like he was preparing to walk into something he couldn't turn back from. Outside, a car passed, the faint sound filling the quiet room for a second, and then it faded, leaving only the tension between them. Emma noticed that his breathing had quickened, and he looked like someone holding back tears he didn't want to show. Whatever he wanted to say wasn't just important, it felt life-changing for him. She waited without pushing, knowing the moment he spoke, something in their relationship would shift, maybe in a necessary way. When he finally met her eyes again, there was a fragile honesty in them, and he whispered her name softly, as if grounding himself, before saying he needed to finally tell her something that had been inside him for far too long. That sentence alone made her heart beat faster because it carried the weight of a secret that had cost him sleep and peace. She kept her expression calm, encouraging, letting him know she was right there with him, ready to hear whatever had broken through his silence. He opened his mouth to speak again, but the words seemed stuck in his throat, and the struggle in his face made her want to reach out and comfort him, but she held back, knowing he needed to do this on his own time. The room felt charged, as if something unseen had wrapped around them, holding the moment still, and Emma sensed that whatever his truth was, he had come to her because he trusted her more than anyone else, because she had always been a steady place in his life. She waited, her breath held without meaning to, and he whispered, "Aunt Emma, I need to tell you the truth about something," and though he didn't say more, the depth in his voice made her realize this confession would open a new chapter for him. Before she could respond, she saw his eyes flicker with a mixture of hope and fear, and she felt a small tremor of emotion herself, realizing that no matter what he was about to share, he was doing it because he believed she would listen without judgment. That quiet trust warmed her deeply. She prepared herself, steadying her tone, encouraging him to take his time, and he gave one last shaky exhale, sitting straighter as if preparing to step through an emotional doorway he had been avoiding for far too long. And in the stillness of her living room, filled with soft afternoon light and the weight of unspoken feelings, Emma understood that this moment mattered, because Liam was finally ready to share the secret that had been shaping his thoughts, his days, and his heart. And as he looked at her again, eyes full of something he had held inside too long, she braced herself gently, knowing his truth, whatever it was finally about to be spoken. Emma Clark leaned closer to Liam, her presence calm and steady, sensing the storm of emotions inside him and wanting him to feel safe. As he hesitated, fingers twitching nervously, unsure how to begin, his gaze fixed on the floor, shoulders hunched with tension, and she softly encouraged him to speak, reminding him that he could share anything without fear of judgment. And at last he took a deep breath, exhaling shakily as if releasing months of bottled-up feelings, and began to explain that he had been struggling with something deeper than work or school, something personal that weighed heavily on his heart, admitting that he felt lost in ways he could not fully describe. And Emma listened quietly, letting the silence fill the room while she offered her gentle support, sensing that he needed more than words. He needed patience and understanding, and he hesitated again, chewing his lip, before confessing that he had feelings for someone, feelings that were intense and confusing, making him question himself and fear rejection. And he admitted that he had tried to ignore these emotions, telling himself they were wrong or inappropriate, but they only grew stronger with time, and now he could not hide them anymore, which is why he had come to her, because he trusted her enough to be honest and vulnerable in a way he had not been with anyone else. And she nodded softly, her heart swelling with empathy and a quiet sense of pride at his courage, encouraging him to continue without fear. And Liam looked at her briefly, eyes glistening with nervous energy, and explained that the person he cared about had been a constant presence in his life, someone kind, attentive, and comforting, whose smiles and words lingered in his thoughts, making him feel alive and understood. And the more he tried to suppress these feelings, the stronger they became, until he felt compelled to finally speak. And he admitted aloud that he was terrified of how this person might respond, worried that confessing could ruin the friendship they shared. Yet the weight of silence had become unbearable, and Emma's gentle nods reassured him that expressing truth was not something to fear, and she reminded him that emotions are valid and natural, that caring for someone deeply does not make anyone wrong. And her words seemed to ease the tight knot in his chest, allowing him to breathe a little more freely. And he continued, describing the longing he felt every day, the way thoughts of this person occupied his mind and heart, how even small interactions felt monumental, how smiles and glances left him thinking about them long after the moment passed. And his voice wavered as he spoke, but Emma held space for him without interruption, knowing the importance of letting him fully express what had been trapped inside for too long. And he admitted that he was scared to act, scared to admit how much he cared, fearing judgment or misunderstanding. And yet here he was, seeking courage, seeking guidance, seeking the comfort of someone who loved him unconditionally. And Emma's heart ached in that familiar, nurturing way, remembering the same feelings of vulnerability and hope she had once carried. And she reassured him that being honest about emotions is brave, and that the right person will appreciate sincerity, that true feelings deserve to be acknowledged, not hidden. And Liam listened, absorbing each word, feeling a flicker of hope and relief at having someone witness his heart without criticism. And he finally admitted the name that had been on his mind constantly, Chloe, a person he had admired and cared for in secret, someone who had always seemed slightly out of reach yet somehow profoundly present in his life. And revealing her name aloud made his nerves spike, his stomach tightening, yet it also lightened a burden he had carried silently for months. And Emma smiled warmly, letting him feel the support and love behind her gaze, assuring him that sharing truth was the first step toward finding courage and clarity. And Liam felt an unusual mix of fear, relief, and anticipation, knowing that by opening up, he had begun a new chapter where possibilities existed, where honesty could lead to connection, and where he might finally bridge the gap between longing and reality. And Emma encouraged him to trust his feelings, reminding him that timing and sincerity mattered more than perfection, that approaching someone from a place of honesty and respect could create moments of real understanding. And as Liam exhaled, he felt lighter, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, a small spark of confidence emerging, as if the very act of speaking had begun to dissolve the anxiety that had gripped him. And the room seemed warmer, filled with the unspoken comfort of familial love and acceptance, a quiet sense of calm amidst emotional turbulence. And as he looked at Emma, a fragile smile appeared, the kind that hints at bravery newly found, and he realized that being truthful about his feelings was not only a gift to Chloe but also to himself, that sharing the weight of emotions could create space for clarity, connection, and possibly happiness, and Emma, seeing this, felt her own heart swell with quiet pride, knowing he had taken the first courageous step, and she encouraged him gently, telling him to follow his heart while being patient, reminding him that honesty is powerful and beautiful. And as Liam absorbed these words, a mix of nervousness and excitement filled him, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, opening his heart could lead to something meaningful, and in that moment, he understood that the fear he had carried was natural, but it did not have to define him, and with Emma's calm presence beside him, he felt ready to face the next step, to embrace vulnerability, to consider speaking to Chloe, knowing he had support, understanding, and love guiding him, and the room held a quiet magic, a gentle tension of anticipation and hope, signaling that a turning point had arrived, and Liam, though still nervous, sat up straighter, taking a steadying breath, his heart lighter and his mind clearer, ready to move forward, ready to face the feelings he had carried alone for far too long, and in that quiet living room, filled with sunlight and understanding, a sense of emotional awakening unfolded, marking the moment where fear began to give way to courage, and the truth he had whispered to Emma was now a seed of possibility. Fragile but strong, waiting to grow into something real, Emma Clark watched Liam closely as he shifted nervously on the couch, his fingers fidgeting, his gaze darting to the floor, and she could sense that the moment of confession was not over yet, that the next words he would speak carried more weight than he could fully bear, and she leaned forward slightly, her presence calm and reassuring, letting him know without speaking that she would not judge him, that she was there to listen, and after a long, tense pause, he finally spoke, his voice soft but trembling, admitting that the person he cared about was someone he had known for years, someone familiar yet profoundly important in his life, someone whose kindness and attention had gradually grown into feelings he could no longer ignore, and Emma felt her chest tighten with empathy as she listened, realizing that Liam was standing on the edge of a personal truth he had never dared to share, that he had carried this longing silently, day after day, moment after moment, afraid that expressing it might change everything, and he hesitated again, chewing his lip, taking shallow breaths. And then he whispered her name, Chloe, an acknowledgement of the person who had unknowingly captured his heart, and Emma nodded gently, encouraging him to continue, feeling the tension in the room thicken as Liam struggled to articulate emotions he had tried to hide even from himself, and he spoke of the way Chloe's presence affected him, how her smiles, her words, her laughter lingered in his thoughts, how even small moments shared with her felt monumental, how the idea of her not knowing or not feeling the same way had caused him anxiety and sleepless nights, how he had rehearsed conversations in his mind endlessly, worrying that any misstep might ruin a friendship he cherished, and Emma remained silent, letting him speak freely, understanding that this was more than a crush, that this was a deep, honest affection that had grown into something he could no longer contain, and Liam admitted that fear had kept him from telling Chloe the truth, that he had worried about rejection, misunderstanding, or complicating what they already shared, and he looked at Emma with wide, vulnerable eyes, searching for reassurance, for guidance, for a sense that his feelings were not wrong, and Emma offered a warm, steady smile, letting him feel that being honest was brave, that emotions are valid, and that the right person would appreciate sincerity, that love and affection are never a burden when shared genuinely. And Liam exhaled sharply, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, the air around them seeming lighter as he absorbed her words, and he confessed that every thought of Chloe made him simultaneously anxious and exhilarated, that he had never felt anything so intense, and that the longing he experienced daily was both beautiful and frightening, making him wonder if he could ever be truly happy without speaking his heart aloud, and Emma nodded again, her gaze soft, affirming that acknowledging these emotions was the first step toward clarity and courage. That confronting feelings with honesty often leads to connection, understanding, and even love, and Liam listened carefully, feeling a spark of hope ignite within him, the thought that perhaps Chloe might feel something similar, that perhaps his courage might be met with kindness rather than rejection, and the mere possibility gave him a fragile but growing confidence, a sense that the vulnerability he carried could become a bridge instead of a barrier, and he described Chloe's qualities with careful admiration, how she had always been attentive, considerate, and warm, how she had inspired him to be better, to open up, to face his emotions without hiding, and Emma felt a pang of nostalgia for the young man he had been, the sensitive soul she had always known, and she marveled at how he was now learning to embrace his own feelings, learning to trust that speaking truth is not weakness but strength. And Liam's voice wavered as he admitted that he had imagined countless ways of confessing, each scenario playing repeatedly in his mind, the fear of misjudgment and the hope of mutual feelings clashing within him, leaving him both paralyzed and desperate, and Emma's gentle encouragement reminded him that he had already demonstrated courage by telling her that the next step was simply honesty, that sincerity always carries weight, and that Chloe might already sense the emotions he had kept hidden, that perhaps she was waiting for him to speak, and this thought made his heartbeat quicken, his chest tighten with anticipation and nervous hope, and he finally asked, his voice barely audible, whether he should tell Chloe how he felt, if now was the right moment, and Emma smiled softly, placing her hand near his in a comforting, non-intrusive way, assuring him that truth spoken from the heart is never wasted, that timing matters but fear should not stop expression, and Liam absorbed her words, feeling a new sense of resolve, a gentle courage that allowed him to imagine a possibility where his feelings could be received openly, without judgment, and he realized that sharing this part of himself with Emma had already lifted a weight from his chest, a prelude to what might come when he finally spoke to Chloe, and he looked at her again, eyes bright with tentative hope, and admitted that even saying her name aloud had been both terrifying and freeing, that the simple act of naming her had begun to transform his fear into determination, and Emma nodded with understanding, reinforcing that acknowledging truth is a powerful act, and that love expressed honestly is something to be proud of, not ashamed of, and Liam exhaled, a shaky but real smile forming as he felt the tension in his body begin to ease, the fear and longing coexisting with hope and excitement, a mixture that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't before, and he realized that having someone to witness his emotions, someone to listen without judgment, had shifted the balance, made the possibility of speaking to Chloe less daunting, more achievable, and he felt a quiet thrill at the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, his courage might be met with understanding, maybe even reciprocity, and Emma watched him with a sense of pride and warmth, knowing he was on the brink of embracing vulnerability, understanding that emotional honesty is the key to connection, and Liam, though still nervous, felt a new spark of bravery, ready to consider taking the next step, feeling lighter, freer, and more hopeful than when he had arrived, and as the room settled into a quiet, anticipatory calm, the shared understanding between aunt and nephew created a space where truth could flourish, where courage could grow, and where the possibility of something beautiful awaited just beyond the next step, and Liam knew in his heart that he was not alone, that Emma's support had prepared him to face his feelings, that Chloe's name, once whispered in secrecy, might soon be met with acknowledgement, that his fear could transform into connection, and that the long silence he had carried within was beginning to give way to the first gentle rays of hope and emotional clarity. Emma Clark felt the room shift as Liam sat straighter, his fingers still trembling slightly, a nervous energy lingering in the air, and she realized that the moment had arrived where courage and vulnerability collided, that the conversation they had shared had prepared him for the next step, the step where truth would meet possibility, and she spoke softly, reminding him that honesty is powerful, that feelings expressed sincerely are never wasted, that the heart speaks best when it is brave, and Liam absorbed each word, his chest rising and falling with a mix of fear and anticipation, the weight of months of silent longing pressing on him yet softened by Emma's unwavering support, and he admitted once again how much he had cared, how every thought of Chloe had filled his mind and heart, how even the smallest interactions with her had felt monumental, and how he had feared that confessing might ruin everything, yet he knew he could not hold it in any longer, and Emma nodded gently, letting him feel the safety in the space she had created, reminding him that real connection grows from truth and vulnerability, and Liam felt a flicker of hope ignite, imagining that Chloe might feel something similar, that his courage might be met with understanding, that the bond they shared could grow stronger if he spoke honestly, and he asked quietly what he should say, how he could express feelings so deeply rooted without overwhelming her. And Emma encouraged him to speak simply, honestly, and from the heart, telling him that sincerity matters more than perfect words, that the courage to express love is a gift in itself, and Liam's nerves seemed to steady slightly, a fragile determination forming within him as he envisioned Chloe receiving his truth, and just then, his phone chimed, a sudden interruption that made his heart race, and Emma noticed the way his eyes widened as he saw a message from Chloe, a message that read, "Can we talk?" Something important, and the timing felt surreal, as if the universe had aligned, giving him a chance he had only dreamed of, and Liam whispered in disbelief, his voice tight with emotion, that Chloe was near, that she wanted to see him, and Emma smiled gently, placing her hand near his shoulder in quiet support, reminding him to breathe, to trust himself, to let his heart guide the next moments, and he exhaled shakily, feeling both terrified and exhilarated, knowing that the opportunity to speak his truth had arrived unexpectedly, that the moment of vulnerability was real and immediate, and that the feelings he had carried in secret could finally be shared face to face, and the knock on the door echoed through the house, each sound amplifying the tension in the room, making Liam's heartbeat quicken, and Emma whispered softly, "Go ahead, your truth is waiting," and he felt a surge of determination mixed with fear as he rose, each step toward the door a step toward embracing vulnerability, toward risking rejection but also toward the possibility of connection, of being seen fully, of finally bridging the gap between longing and reality, and as his hand hovered over the handle, he took a deep, steadying breath, remembering every word of encouragement Emma had offered, every moment of listening and understanding, every gentle nod that told him he was not alone, and with that, he opened the door, revealing Chloe standing there, nervous yet hopeful, her eyes lifting to meet his, and in that instant, the tension, the fear, the anticipation all converged, creating a fragile but potent space where honesty could flourish, where emotions could be expressed freely, and where hearts could connect in a moment that felt suspended in time, and Liam felt his chest tighten with emotion, the months of silent longing, the nights spent imagining this encounter, the anxiety and hope blending into a single, electric sensation that made him feel alive and vulnerable at once. And Chloe's soft voice reached him, tremulous yet full of meaning, saying she needed to talk about something important, and Liam realized with a shock of exhilaration that she might feel the same way he did, that perhaps his courage would be met with reciprocity, that the walls built by fear and hesitation might crumble in a single, honest exchange, and as he stepped slightly forward, heart pounding, eyes locked on hers, he felt the world narrow to this doorway, to this shared space, to the fragile but undeniable connection that had been waiting for months to be acknowledged, and Emma remained quietly behind, a reassuring presence, knowing that Liam had reached a turning point, that the courage he had found within himself, nurtured by trust and honesty, had brought him to the threshold of something meaningful, something that could blossom into love, into understanding, into shared vulnerability, and Liam, still trembling slightly but smiling faintly, finally felt the exhilarating possibility of being seen, of speaking truth, of bridging the gap between longing and reality, and as Chloe stepped closer, the tension in the room was charged not with fear but with hope, with the gentle electricity of emotions poised to be expressed, and in that delicate balance, Liam realized that the courage to face fear, to speak honestly, and to open his heart had brought him to a moment where everything felt possible, where the past months of longing and uncertainty could transform into connection, into mutual understanding, into the fragile, tender beginnings of something beautiful, and he took a slow breath, feeling the weight of fear lift slightly, the promise of emotional honesty fill him, and with Chloe before him, eyes wide and soft, heart racing, he knew that this moment, fragile yet powerful, marked the start of a new chapter, one where truth, courage, and the hope of love intertwined, creating a space where vulnerability was met with openness, where longing could be acknowledged, and where the future, uncertain but bright, waited just beyond the threshold, and Liam felt a surge of anticipation and warmth, knowing that the next words spoken could shape everything, that his courage had led him to this doorway, that the silent months of yearning had culminated in this instant, that the fears of rejection were balanced by the promise of understanding, and as Chloe spoke again, her voice soft but earnest, the room seemed to hold its breath, and Liam realized with a mix of relief, hope, and excitement that he was no longer alone in his feelings, that the truth he had carried so long was now about to meet its counterpart, that vulnerability had brought him here, to the edge of possibility, and in that shared glance, that suspended heartbeat, that quiet but electric connection, he knew that the journey of the heart had only just begun, and that courage, honesty, and love could transform months of silent longing into a moment charged with promise, with emotional clarity, and with the tender anticipation of something real and meaningful beginning to bloom.